So
Exodus, huh?
yeah, and Alexander Bard has a term he calls exodology, which I think is a good word because you could look at it in terms of the Jews and all that, but you could also look at it in the larger sense of how to move from one place to the next, right? So how to move from a corrupt
Like
situation.
wondering for 40 years what you can achieve in 8 or what?
Yeah, maybe. But the thing is, okay, you're in a situation that is static and kind of corrupt and hierarchical and not it's not a living situation, and you're a slave, in Egypt. And then you're one. Then the revolution happens of some kind. Mm-hmm. But the revolution, it doesn't lead to this glorious utopia at all. You're out in the desert. You're alone. You're in a situation where you don't have the structure anymore. You don't have the government. You don't have the people who are running things, and you're lost in a sense in the desert. And so you scramble around and try to figure out, what to do, because in the desert you've got no points of reference. You just got people who are like-minded. You're all the Jews, and then what happens is Moses starts to become a tyrant, right? The leader, he starts a little bit to become a tyrant himself, and he starts to reproduce Egypt. He starts to become the pharaoh of he starts to reproduce that structure because it's the only structure he knows. And then there's this cool guy named Jethro who comes along, and he's not one of the Jews. He's an outsider from an outsider tribe, and he says, "Wait a minute, Moses. You need to figure out how to do good government here. You need to figure out how to give everybody that a proper role in the society. So you don't have total anarchy on one hand. You don't have all the war of all against all, and on the other hand, you don't have a top-down, structure of tyranny. On the other hand, so Jethro tells Moses, you need to what's the word I'm looking for? You need to give other people autonomy, individuality within the group. So then you create little tribes. So then you start to create the tribes of Israel. And then you have a vision and you can move right to the next thing, to the next world, to the promised land. So anyway, so I've noticed this in groups that I've been running or been involved with, that I've noticed that, there's an organization, and then it gets top down, and then people fight, and then it splits, and then somebody is cast out into the desert, and they try to start another organization, and then they fight with each other for a while, and then they try to figure out how to make it work, and they need something from outside to come in and say, okay, here's how you do it. This guy does this, and this guy does this, and this guy does this, and this guy's in charge of this. Like, you need leadership, which also gives people a sense of ownership and responsibility at the same time of the thing, so that you're not in this slave master relationship. So that's kind of what I think Jordan Peterson's been talking about in his new podcast with Joe Rogan, and I found that very relevant. And I found it very interesting that, that is what the book of Exodus is about. It's about how to create a proper government when you're in this chaotic maelstrom,
Right.
which we're all in right now. So it's like, how do you create proper structures within the internet new paradigm, where the old ones are ossified and corrupt and full of ineffectual or tyrannical leaders, and then you have all this energy and creativity, but you risk making another pharaonic structure. right?
Right.
There you go.
I don't know.
That's my spiel. You don't know.
No, of course not. But it's always good to have alternatives, I think. I mean, like, to the system that we're living in. And so I always come back. I think we talked about this at some point, about Buckminster Fuller, and the book he wrote, The Critical Path. And so what happens when you have a goal and you have a leader that kind of proposes a goal, and then you've built societal and cultural structures so that everyone can kind of participate. And then it happens that you have like a leader who says, when was it, in 1962? We will go to the moon and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. This kind of thing. And then suddenly everybody's involved, from the engineer to the architects, to the NASA designers, to the guys who clean the floors, and everybody feels equally important because they're contributing to this kind of grand vision.
Yeah.
And then 7 years later, they send like a couple of guys to the moon with technology that is not even up to par to the iPhone that we're having now, right? And so that's
yeah, well, that's exactly that's the same story in a way. You would say JFK would be Moses in this story. He's in a chaotic situation with the USSR, right? At the time, there's a Cold War going on, and there's a war of all against all.
Right.
And he proposes a vision, and he gives everybody a role, and then everybody's on board with that vision, and everybody has a role, and then so they can get to the promised land, which turned out to be the moon. But anyway, doesn't matter. It's just a question of how to get from one place to the other.
When was the last time you heard that speech?
Oh, I don't know, a long time ago.
Huh?
I don't
Because
remember.
he says something so interesting. Maybe it works. Let me set this up, because I was listening to this the other day, and there's such an interesting element to our our conversation. I don't know if it works. So please start it. Do you hear that?
No man can fully grasp how far and how fast we have come. But condense, if you will, the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of but a half a century. Stated in these terms, we know very little about the first 40 years, except at the end of them, advanced man had learned to use the skins of animals to cover them. Then about 10 years ago, under this standard, man emerged from his caves to construct other kinds of shelter. Only 5 years ago,
here's Moses.
Man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. Christianity began less than 2 years ago.
Give it a sec.
The printing press came this year. And then less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine provided a new source of power. Newton explored the meaning of gravity. Last month, electric lights and telephones and automobiles and airplanes became available. Only last week did we develop penicillin and television and nuclear power. This is a breathtaking pace, and such a pace cannot help but create new ills as it dispels old. So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. We shall send to the moon, 240,000 miles away, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body and then return it safely to Earth. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing.
All right. Okay. So there's like this interesting aspect of it, you know. So it serves as a goal to organize to the best our energies, and that's the only point. That's not about. It's not about going to the moon itself. It's about that we have a vision, like a fixed star, and that star organizes all our ambition, all our intentions, all our energies.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the interesting part of the whole thing. And so he did this not only psychologically, but, you know, socially. So that gives structure. And I think that's what you're talking about, you know, when talking about Exodus and all of these things. You know, we need
exactly. I mean, this can be scaled down to anything, right?
Right.
It can be the going to the moon, but it can be the smallest task, right? That you try to achieve with people collectively, right?
Right.
So I was thinking as I was watching it, there's this expansive movement outwards to the moon, and that is one pole. And then there's this inward movement, and that's the Hermetic movement, right?
Right.
Which is the deep, like, let's say, the lunar world, you know, of the unconscious.
Right.
So I guess I think both of those there's like let's say a double arrow. One going to expanding outward, you know, with all the technology and all that, you know,
Right.
And then there's the inward development as well, which becomes less. So now that man has found the moon, there is a kind of a sense that there's a disappointment that arrives at the point of achievement, because where do you go from there? All right.
Right.
You just keep going into space, but you could also keep going into the inner space, you know, with you know, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I mean, the interesting thing is, again, I'm talking more about the ecology of the psyche, or the ecology of mind, you know.
Yes.
And so it's not about the moon, and it's basically also not about, let's say, ultimate enlightenment, but it's in a way of structuring and organizing yourself that you know, find in a harmonious self-alignment with your energies and with your ambitions and everything. You know, it's like, okay, so that people always like drawn more to living in the world and, you know, acting in the world and with the world. But then there are more like also like people that are more introverted and like to go into meditation and strive to integrate the inner moon, whatever, you know. But it's, in any case, it's about the ecology of the psyche and the way to bring it all, you know, together, and to have like this feeling of harmonious alignment of the psyche while acting outwardly or inwardly.
Yeah.
I don't
harmonious
give a shit
acting of the psyche.
Yeah.
Harmonious acting of the psyche means that you find your place within the team, right, or the tribe, and also your sovereign place. So you need to combine your own sovereignty with the larger archetypal movement.
Right.
This is why, you know, creating a structure with a goal is very difficult, because everybody has their own sort of ego about an idea of what is true and where to go, and how do you align everybody, you know, within that, without having just conflict and let's say stasis, just spinning your wheels, or just being very inefficient, or turning into a sort of, like well, I was thinking about how, I was thinking there's two poles here. There's either tyranny, right? Or there's, let's say, the people, right, rule, which is a mob rule. So I think in structures, it could be a business, could be a school, it could be an online organization, it could be anything, but the structures have a tendency towards either anarchy or tyranny. And how do you find something? How do you move towards? How do you move? Like, this is why the story of Exodus is so good, because it's the 12 tribes of Israel. It's a bunch of people working together, right? It's moving in a certain direction, right? It's not like a hero's mythology where one guy saves the world. This is why I like the Hebrew religion, in fact, because it's not about one guy getting enlightenment or saving the world, really. Although there is Moses, but the Jewish tradition is very much based in communitarian kind of movement, but not with tyranny. I think they figured that out.
I think I'm a little bit pessimistic, because I think the 60s, for that matter, it's like this speech that was like kind of, and that critical path society was that on, and bringing these people to the moon. I think that was like a lightning in the bottle, they're catching a lightning in the bottle. It's like that doesn't happen normally. But it was such an optimistic time also, because like that was the same time, Star Trek was developed, and Star Trek is what you're talking about. That is neither, mob rule nor is a tyranny, but this is like a fantasy about an ideal culture that ventures out into the unknown to, connect with other tribes, and where everybody has their purpose in a kind of way, in their uniform.
Yeah.
But also where, the individuality is kind of honored. And that's why these movies and these television series are so appealing to us, because that will never happen, probably not. But it's a nice utopian ideal, It's like maybe in 10,000 years, if we're still there, that could be. But
well, it's not that it never happens. It's that it's always the template that's there, and we move in and out of that template. We align with that template for a while, and then we fall out of it. That's how I see it. I mean,
no. Like, give me, except of the moon project, give me one other example where this kind of social organization did not tilt towards mob rule or tyranny.
Oh, like, I mean, I've been in organizations that work. I've been in Zen groups and things like this where people.
I mean, like large scale.
No, I don't. I don't. I'm not talking about large scale. I think large scale is just one thing. But I don't think we're in a period of very big large scale. I mean, it's possible. I mean, maybe another sort of catalyzing figure will appear in the world that will kind of set things straight, like a messiah of some sort. I guess we need these messiahs occasionally, right?
Right.
They always get killed. Martin Luther and John F. Kennedy, whatever. They always get killed.
So you were talking on more small scale, like in.
Well, no, I was just talking about something very simple. It's like how to run an organization, how to run a government, how to have the right principles. And the right principles are sort of being able to have small scale work in a network with a vision, sort of thing. Like even just Parallax right now, right?
Right.
So we have an idea of what we want to do, and we're connected to various different tribes, and we could just have a falling out and go to war with each other, and the whole thing could fall apart, or we could just get stuck and not evolve, or we could really do something cool and so it's like, how do we do that? And I think the story of Exodus is the archetype for is like it's like an architectural plan about how to do that.
So again,
so that's how I'm looking at it. I mean, I don't have great, for the society, I don't have great hope for the society or anything like that. And I think we're in a different time, but I think that you can do this kind of thing on a small scale. If you get the
Sure,
architecture,
on this
right?
on the smaller scale, I mean, if it's just me and you, we have like an alignment of goals and ideals and
Yeah.
perspectives and all. That's pretty easy, but and then you can broaden the circle, and the more broad it gets, the more the more conflict you invite, and the more diversity of opinions and goals, and and so
Yeah.
and I don't know. That's like how do you approach? How do you want to approach that? Like, what does Exodus say? Like, how do you? Who is
Well,
supposed to decide which values and goals like a society has to follow?
yeah. So that is the issue, right? That's the big question. And in the Jewish mythology, it would be God, right? It would be the divine. So when Jethro meets Moses, he doesn't say, "Oh, Moses, you're the greatest guy ever." He says you've served God correctly.
Mm.
So there's a way in which there has to be a higher service. I think John F. K. or Martin Luther, they were appealing to a higher service rather than running the show through their own ego. But what that means today is a little bit difficult.
Mm.
In terms of leadership, it's interesting. It's like I think the people who lead the thing properly don't even really want to be leaders. They're kind of the people that are dragged out. Like Moses was like 80 years old. He was living with his parents, having a good time.
Oh, you mean in the myth?
In the myth, yeah. But I'm
Yeah.
I'm applying the myth. So he didn't want to do it, but he was kind of dragged out into that
No,
situation.
but the reality is, it's like the other way around. There are
No,
people.
what I mean
Yeah.
to say though is that that the people who really want to do it, they're the dangerous ones. The people who want to lead the thing or want to bring the world to
Yeah.
a utopia, they're the
Yeah.
ones you have to
Exactly.
stay away from. But the
Right.
guys who are sort of like dragged into it through something, they're
Yeah.
probably more trustworthy.
Of course, that's the hero's myth. That's the first step, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mm.
sure. Yeah, but the hero's myth often gets misinterpreted as an individual journey. And it is an individual journey, but it's also a tribal journey, right? There's this kind of, I guess there's kind of a tension between the vision of, let's say, Christianity and Judaism. And Judaism has more of a communal, tribal view, and Christianity has a more universal view where everybody's sort of has to follow Jesus or something.
Mm. You know what my issue is?
Mm-hmm. What's your
I
issue?
have an issue since 2 days, and my issue is that Peter Sloterdijk has a new book out, right? And it's about us being he always like works with myth and storytelling, and so it's like his new book is about Perseus and fire, and how we are like igniters of fire, and so he weaves this big story about that we but the point I'm making, so every book of his is like this. So he takes one story and he uses it as a universal template to explain human nature, right? And so just Peter Sloterdijk, and I love him a lot, but he has a shtick, right? And so then you have all these myths, and Peterson, who goes into the different parts of the Bible and whatnot. And then I think it can't be all true at the same time, right? And so I'm thinking, I'm starting to think in the lines of what Alex Ebert is bringing always in the conversation of excess. And now it's just like excess thought. It doesn't add anything of value, it just storytelling. We are storytelling machines, in a kind of way, but it doesn't add anything except that we are like engaging in excess and psychological excess energy, because all these myths can't be true at the same time.
I don't know about that. I mean, what is untrue about that myth? I mean, there's nothing
It's
untrue
untrue
about
because
it.
it's like if you use one myth to shed a light on human nature, that's all right, and maybe 2 or 10 or 100, but 1,000, right?
And what there, I mean, I think there are kind of like templates, like there. I think you're, for me, this is maybe we had this kind of argument before, and you're kind of more postmodern than me, I think here. You're saying
I don't
there's
know.
all
What do you
kinds
mean?
of stories, and so how do I choose which story is true? And it's just an excessive kind of explosion of ideas, but I'm more thinking, oh no, there are templates, there's they're not that hard to understand. There's basic physics, right?
Physics?
There's a physics to these stories.
What do you mean?
Well, there's a to the Exodus story, it's like it's a story that has a certain essential truth to it.
Does it though?
Absolutely.
No, I know what you mean.
So you're saying there is no story, but there is a story.
No, I'm just playing devil's advocate
Yeah.
here because, we have to talk about something. And so my
Okay,
thought was, okay, I know that, myth, expose ways of behaving in the world, and get it, deliver a template to the ways we can act in and with the world. And I get
Yeah,
that.
just a map, not the world, but a map of
Yes,
the world.
exactly.
Mhm. And like you can't make up,
but there's
like
still
you can't just
completely
make up your own map,
but they're still completely symbolic, and they're completely arbitrary in a kind of way.
They're not arbitrary because the map refers to something. Like you can't just create an arbitrary map of some imaginary territory. That's science fiction, but we're not talking about science fiction. We're talking
No, we
about,
just talked about Star Trek, which
yeah,
is
but that's
a myth.
but even Star Trek is still working with the Earth. It pretends to be the space, but it's talking about, as you say, the different tribes. And even the Star Trek myth is the Exodus myth, basically. It is the Exodus myth, the Star Trek myth. That's what it is. It's just expanding the boundaries of that. But if you're making a map, the map has to refer to a mountain. It can't refer, you can't put something where it has to refer to something. It doesn't reduce the territory.
Let
it
me
just
play even
refers
more
to
devil's advocate here. Okay, so
it
because
refers to the territory. It doesn't reduce it.
So if you have like let's look into the psyche, right? And
Mhm.
so you have all these different kinds of models of what psyche is, so there's a eternal conflict between super id and super ego and id, and with the ego in between. Then you have the idea of the psyche as like holons within holons within holons, and then you have the idea of developmental stages, and on and on and on and on and on. And the psyche as a mycelium kind of structure, and they're all descriptive. And first, you can play this game infinitely. You just make shit up, and psyche has like this weird ability to conform to what you're thinking about it. And so like Robert Anton Wilson famously said, like what the thinker thinks, the proof master in your mind proves it. Right. And so psyche has like this eerie thing that as soon as you come up with an idea about psyche itself, psyche tends to take the charm and the form of it. And there's like a joke that publishers have, so the amount of manuscripts you get that have some new outlines of psyche or psychological characteristics, that's infinite, because everybody comes up with some shit.
No, there are infinite variations of a theme.
I know.
Like, for example, in music.
I'm not done with my argument yet.
Okay.
And so you have psyche in a way. It's like as soon as you start to observe it, it's like infinitely malleable. It's like, oh no, it is that. It is also that, but it's not really that. The whole idea of developmental stages is an invention, and it doesn't mean that it's not true. It kind of works, or super ego and it, but it's still an invention, right? It's a shape and a gestalt that you or a scheme that you through which you filter and observe what psyche is, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to have both. You have to have it kind of works, but it's but it's still an invention, and then you can be playful with this, but it's still an invention.
You're wanting to preserve the playfulness so we don't reify the archetypes into some ultimate a Platonic architecture that where you can't move. It's just this is the way reality is. Well, yeah, so how I see it, or how I think of it, is you have a bit like what Daniel Schmachtenberg says about perspective. It's like if you want to get a perspective on something, you have to take several perspectives and then come up with the best perspective. It's not an ultimate perspective because each perspective is a reduction. By nature of being a perspective, it's a reduction. So you have to get several perspectives and put them all together in this kind of collage to get as deeply a dimension of perspectives as you can, and then you can act. And so if you just got stuck with the Exodus myth and kind of believed it in a literalist fundamentalist sort of way, then you would be creating more exoteric religion.
But that's not the issue that I have. The issue is okay, so how do I explain this? So there's an idea, and it's actually an idea that also like Hegel came up with. So in Hegel's idea is that thought and reality are somewhat the same, right? And so you find that idea in everywhere, in different philosophies, in different religions whatsoever. And so you think, and even like in developmental theory, you have the idea that people go through developmental stages, and every developmental stage is also signified by the complexity of the world they're living in, right? And so if you have like a baby doesn't have object permanence. And that means if you have like two glasses, one is thick and tiny and the other one is long and thin, with the same amount of water, you pull the water in the other glass without spilling it, and the baby thinks it's different amounts of water, so there's no object permanence. So the world is kind of it's not permanent. It's different than from an adult perspective. And so with every developmental stage, our world kind of complexifies, right? And so if you think about this, then you are like in a situation where you think about future selves and future worlds that you can inhabit. And you can't really disentangle those two, because as soon as you think about a future world of yours, you have to at the same time think about your future self, because it only constitutes itself by you doing things in the world, right? And so but then if you take that for granted, if you take this, then you have to think that, okay, the world I'm living in and me acting in the world, that is kind of congruent. And I'm acting in the world, and every description that I have about me being separated from the world, this is just excess energy, that is just excess thought. And all these different perspectives, that's just excess. That doesn't really add anything to me being fundamentally embedded in the world I'm living in and with. Right? And so it doesn't really make a difference if you take one perspective or 100 or find the best perspective, because you're already completely embedded in the world.
No, there's better perspectives. Some perspectives are better than others. There's value of some perspectives have some value, and other perspectives have very little value.
In the excess world, of course, but it doesn't add anything. Not fundamentally.
I think what doesn't add anything? Another perspective? Or I think, well, a good perspective does add something, like, because then you have a vision of where you want to go. Because as you were speaking, I was saying, okay, here he goes with the Exodus myth again. You're a child and you have no object permanence. In other words, you're in Egypt, and then you move through these different stages, and now you're in the desert, and you have to have a future self, which is the promised land. So you're just kind of you are telling the Exodus myth when you're saying that. I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's a pattern. I can see that pattern,
right? And
that's a pattern I can see. It's not arbitrary. It's not made up. It's not just something you create from nothing. What I like about the excess idea, though, is that there's always a new manifestation of that, and you probably don't. You could think of it that way or not, or you could use many different symbol systems to tell the same story. There's not just one symbol system that tells a story. There's probably many versions of it. I'm still not quite. I don't know if I quite have my finger on on your critique here of like why it's just excess, or why I'm not getting it.
Because in the end of the day, we I think the decisions that we make are far more reliant on the resonance we have in our world and the resonances we form with the world instead of the perspectives that we take.
Resonance instead of perspectives. Why are you dividing those two things?
Because like resonance is a way of living with the world, right? It's a way of engaging with the world. And so that comes mostly instinctual, because we are always embedded in the world, and there are like fields of resonance where you like automatically like zoom in and zone in, and there are like fields that you don't really engage in, right?
Yeah.
And
But
so,
I think when the resonant
different
fields are working, when the resonant fields are in operation, and when you're working, you're aligning with that movement from somewhere to something. If they're not working, you're kind of just spinning your wheels somewhere and creating arbitrary self-made games.
I know all the arguments, for developmental stage models and whatnot. And I like to play, it's like I use those models to, get a better understanding of myself. And that's all fine and dandy. But you have to also account for the fact that in some way it seems as excess energy that doesn't really, so okay, I'll give you another example. So I'm editing a book right now, and so the book is a book about regenerative leadership and ecology and stuff like this, and so the book, big part of the book is about our individual journey of separation, right? And so like we're like, okay, and so the journey of separation is like there was like the matriarchy, and then we started to settle, patriarchy developed, the old story, and then we were like separated. And so we kind of destroyed our nature, and
now we have to get the matriarchy back, maybe.
And so it's like, and then like in the midst of the book, the authors like quote some quantum physics where it says that no, actually we are always embedded and we are always connected with everything. So you have two different in the same book. You have two different kinds of things. And I think in a way the physicists are right. We are always embedded completely. There is no separation. The idea of the separation is excess thought.
That's what I mean. Okay. That works for me, because I'm taking a non-dual vision of, let's say, Genesis or Exodus. Okay. And the non-dual version is, yes, there's a primal unity. Right. That there was no fall from the Garden of Eden. The mistake is the perspective of a fall. Right. And that's just kind of a game that we play, right? That we think that we've fallen from the Garden of Eden and we have to get back into it. That's wrong. That's wrong. Right. Yes. So in that way, I totally agree with you. That's the non-dual view. There never was a separation.
Right.
So there I'm totally agree. These stories are addressing our sense of separation, but the sense of separation is so it's the veils that need to be removed, not reality that needs to be changed.
Right.
So are we agreed there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I mean. So because the fundamental underlying reality is resonance and being embedded in connectedness. Let's frame it like this, and all the other things that the narratives of separation, all the stuff, the narratives we build on top of those, like for example, a developmental stage model. This is in a way that's just excess energy.
Sure,
that's what I mean.
Sure, that's fair enough. I mean, but just on the basic psychological level, right? If we're talking just basic psychology, your girlfriend dumps you, okay?
Yeah.
You were in what you thought was a static situation. Everything was kind of working, but you were a bit of a slave, so you're in Egypt, and now you're in the desert, you have a sense that you separate, you divorce your partner, like you're not together anymore. And you suffer because of that, because of your sense of separation. Because you mistake, you know, in the tantric, you would say you mistake the outer for the inner. You mistake this person as your savior. Whereas actually, this is mistaking the outer for the inner. So you go on this huge journey, which is, you know, fundamentally of rectification, to rectify and to discover what was already the case, the primal unity that you have, which doesn't need anybody, you know, any circumstance or any narrative, or is post narrative or trans narrative, or right. It's just the non-dual free, you know, freedom and excess. In the tantric tradition, you would call that emptiness and luminosity.
Right. I mean, it's what Jim says, Jim Morrison. You know, you're looking for something that already found you.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Exactly. Yeah. So I guess that yeah. So probably the Exodus story is a level of psychological and social reality, which you can sort of, yeah, it's a map of that, but it's not an ultimate. There is no ultimate map. That I'm totally agreed on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if the girlfriend dumps you, you just go and look for another one.
yes. And Keter is everywhere. The crown is not in one place.
Yeah.
The crown is the point of the crown. See, in Keter is supposed to be a point in a circle, but the point is everywhere, and the circle has no periphery, has no periphery. But we kind of perceive it as in a flatland view of there being a circle and a point.
Right. And all these things, after all, are just maps, you know. And I think like that's, I'm not fully sure, but I think like that's what Lacan calls the symbolic, isn't it? And so it's like you're always in these kinds of excess whirlwinds of narratives and perspectives.
Yeah, and the symbolic is you use the symbolic as a kind of homeopathic poison to break down the reified symbolic systems. I think that's the ultimate thing. It's like, if you just create a system, you're creating another big tower that's going to collapse on you.
Yeah.
But you create this tower so that you could create a more dynamic system or something like that.
Yeah. Although the snake bites his tail again, because I mean, can we really do this? I'm not so sure.
What do you mean? Can we really do that?
The poison can we really build more effective systems? I don't know.
Can we build more effective systems? Well, not in any ultimate sense, no, but we can do the best we can. You know, we can create a better system. We're not going to make the world a utopian paradise ever. You know, it's going to be a mess most of the time, but then we can make it better. You know, by being adaptable, allowing the old thing to die and allowing the new thing to come to be.
Right.
I was looking at the Tower card in the Jodorowski system, and it's usually called the Tower of Babel, and that's usually thought of as in a very negative thing, right? But in the original Marseille card, it's called the House of God. And the House of God, it has this kind of explosion. The crown is coming out. It's an explosion of energy. It's and the people who are falling are not just dying on the ground. They have their hands on the ground, and they're kind of dancing, you know, like capoeira, you dance on your hands, and there's all these bright colored things coming down. So we usually think of the tower as being this, you know, ultimate, like, you know, September 11th, the tower of cultures just falling apart, but right. It's also actually an opening and a new expression, a new coming.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So I think that that's like the Tower of Babel allows, instead of just infinite regression, it allows people to speak their own language and find their own language and find, you know.
Oh, that's a really neat reframing of this. That's really cool.
I think so. Yeah. What if we looked at the Tower of Babel instead of being this, you know, we looked at as being not that kind of a revolution, not the kind of snake eating its tail revolution, but a sort of orgasmic explosion of energy and new becoming.
I think, it's like, I think you can probably do this with every tarot card, that you have like these kind of different opposing and accompanying like interpretations of what, the symbol means, because you can look at it as a tower, as, the falling down of all structures, the wrath of God, or, as the wrath of, the Old Testament God. Or or more the Egyptian god of power, who breaks through form and
breaks through this crown of the structure that is
and enables new. It's the first impulse, of raw energy that then condenses step by step into new form. And I think that's super beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's a thing. Like Jodorowski does that a lot, or like he.
Well, no, but Jodorowski went to meet the original family who had these plates of Marseille tarot cards, right? And they're called Camion family in Marseille, and he did a lot of research to try to make them as to get all the colors correct, the original colors, which is difficult because there's so many different decks. He just wanted to restructure it as clear as possible, and he found that in the tower there's a door. Whereas in the, let's say, the Rider-Waite's version, there's no door, there's nothing, and it's a terrible scene, and it's dark and people are dying. And whereas in his card, the people are they have their heads on the earth and their feet in the air, and there's a door, and then out of the tower, which is very colorful, there's a kind of, it's like the lightning bolt or a feather, and it's like a beautiful colorful explosion. And then there's all of these sparkling things falling down. So it doesn't have this and this he claims, I don't know what's true or not, that this is as close to the original card that he could get it. I don't know if he's imposing his own view, and so that's another way of looking at it.
So
yeah, there's 20. He sort of restored it and made it very colorful and bright instead of so like dark and occultish like many of the other cards. But
but anyway. What I mean, does he do that reframing also with other tarot cards, or is that with the tower like one that popped?
Well, he did a lot of research with a big team, and I think it came out in 1997. His deck. Yeah, you should check it out. Yes, I mean there's differences between, let's say, the Marseille Tarot, which came before, I think came in 1930, and there's certainly, he's departing from the Golden Dawn gang and Crowley, and he's not saying those are bad. He just wants to work with the original Marseille deck. And he doesn't like the Rider-Waite deck because he thinks there was a lot of sort of projection on that deck. There's a lot of, I guess everybody who makes these decks projects their own view of the world onto them, right?
Of course.
And so whether he came up with something that is less like that or not, he would say that it's closer to the original, but
I think everybody does that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's just like, it's just like the tarot is like some self-referential thing where you can see it on the spot. It's like, oh no, everybody does it. It's like even that book I mentioned about, regenerative leadership and ecology is like, oh no, that's tarot with another, with another coat on it, with another garment, because it's like, oh no, it's like she has like all these different kinds of interpretations of the world, which are just interpretations in a kind of way, it's like, oh, like the journey of separation. There never was any real separation. It's just a story. And so it's just like, because,
but isn't it always sort of that myth happening again, the myth of separation? Isn't that always the story? It's the same story no matter what guise you put it in, right?
Right. Yeah, but
it's always the same story.
Yeah, or read any philosophy book. That's just one guy making shit up.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. He's making stuff up, but if you're like, this is why like people think Hegel just invented something from nowhere, where he studied all the esoteric thinkers like
He studied all the people just who invented stuff.
There's a lot of Kabbalah in his things, and there's a lot of old references, and yeah, he studied other guys who invented stuff. But this like this, well, okay. What about the Zohar? The Zohar is a fantastic and interesting text. I've sort of looked at it. It's like looking at a kaleidoscope, right? The Zohar. It was created in 13th century Spain by this guy named Moses de Leon, who pretended he didn't write it or channeled it from some first century rabbi who was supposed to have written it in a cave. And he said, this is the book. And then he created this insane book of which is commentary on these stories, but it's so completely unconventional and bizarre and creative. It's like the Jewish version of Dante or something. It's just a wild book. So there's no limit to what can be, to interpretation, I don't think. The Jews are famous for that, for just having incredibly multiple interpretations of one line.
I have something that I want to add.
Mm-hmm.
Because you mentioned the tower, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the Jodorowski interpretation. There's a structure, and then there's like this breaking forth of...
It's like a big penis, and then there's an explosion of sperm.
And so I think my whole argument, and maybe that's the reason why you said it, my whole argument is this, that, we can get caught up in our old structures and the structures of our meaning making of symbols and the Zohar and the Kabbalah and the Tarot and philosophy and Hegel and all that shit. That's the old tower. And at some point, you have to give rise and to accept the excess of it and to say, okay, yeah, I get that. It's all valuable, but it's also complete bullshit, all of it.
Oh, yeah, agreed. Fully agreed.
And so at some point you can't get caught up too much in it. You have to have the freedom to say, oh no, okay, it's just what it is. It's just...
You have to destroy the tower. Like but it's
like, all the tower. Kabbalah is the tower.
Yeah.
Zohar is the tower.
Yeah.
Hegel is the tower. Sloterdijk is just part of the tower. It's at some point, especially if you engage in meditative practices, you have to acknowledge the fact that you have to shut off that meaning-making apparatus and just, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I'm saying that you use these structures to break through the structures. David Che Cohen-Smith calls it the secret mercury. It breaks the structures. It breaks the klipot. You know this word klipot? The klipot are the shells, right? And the shells are the reified structures. The reified structures of our mind, the reified archetypes. The critique of Jungian archetypes is that he tried to reify the archetypes too much. It's like Kantian. There's these categories, and right, but the secret mercury breaks destroys the archetypes. So it explodes the tower, and then you have sudden understanding. Right, it's a lightning flash of Aleph, and the tower explodes. Right. There's gradual understanding, progressive stage understanding, working with symbols, working through all these psychological, metaphysical things, and then there's the explosion. So, the Zen would call it sudden versus gradual enlightenment.
Right.
And they're kind of, and the people who have the experience of the ultimate, explosion always say, oh, well, it's just like how it was. It's like there's nothing there at all.
No, for whatever it's worth, I don't know if this is even true, but the stories of Carlos Castaneda trying to write down what Don Juan was saying, and Don Juan was just laughing about it because it's just adding to the already existing, narrative storytelling what Carlos Castaneda had, and so the laughter is that what liberates.
Yes, well, that's the excess, baby, that we're talking about, kind of, in a way. Like, there's a playful excess. Now, Tractum once thought, he said, I wrote this guy, this teacher in the States, a letter, and I was like, oh, this is, very excessive, my letter, my apologies. And he says, divine likes excess. The divine likes the excessive expressions of luminosity.
Yeah, depends on where you're looking at from. Yeah, that's true.
So so it's like you don't need that shit. You could go full on Zen, just sit in zazen for days in front of a white wall and attain for months and months and
You say zazen for gays?
zazen for gays, yes, for days. I said, but I'm sure there's some good zazen for gays somewhere out there.
There must.
Check it out, guys. Yeah,
I
I
think we
could.
got it, Andrew.
No, but I just want to finish that final sentence because zazen for gays, zazen for days. You could do that, you know, or you could do the ornate kind of expressive kind of symbolic path, you know, to whatever degree you want. Like you have a choice. Like you know, it's not nobody's telling you what's the best path. It's what if your mind is very busy and active and crazy, then you probably need all these crazy stuff that I, you know, delve into like. But if your mind is very simple and clear and you just go for it, you know, do Zen. That's how I see it.
Sure, but I think even in the case of Jnana Yoga, or you know, the enlightenment through philosophy, that kind of strand of Hinduism, right?
Mm-hmm,
I think even there you find the element that philosophy should you bring to the recognition of arbitrariness of that all.
Well, that was Nagarjuna's whole thing was just deconstructing everything. Whatever claim you could make, you just completely deconstructing it always until there's nothing left.
Right.
But just playful expression of freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Bam.